Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive. This time, we're soaring into the world of aviation weather services.
It's a surprisingly complex system.
It really is. And we're using the FAA's Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge as our guide. It's amazing how much goes into keeping those planes up in the air safely. So by the end of this deep dive, you'll have a better grasp of how pilots make those crucial decisions about weather.
We're hoping to give you a real appreciation for just how intricate it all is.
Okay, so let's start with the basics here. Why is weather information so critical in aviation?
Well, it's really the bedrock of flight safety, right? I mean, just like you wouldn't drive across the country without checking the road conditions, pilots can't take to the skies without knowing what's happening up there.
Makes sense.
We're talking wind speeds, visibility, temperature. All these things have a huge impact on an aircraft's performance.
Yeah, I can imagine how a strong headwind could really throw off your fuel calculations.
Right, exactly.
But it's not just about avoiding storms, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. You've got things like wind shear, for example.
Wind shear.
Yeah, it's a sudden, drastic change in wind speed or direction. It's invisible, but incredibly dangerous, especially during takeoff and landing. It's actually Doppler radar that helps pilots avoid these invisible threats.
Ah, Doppler radar. So it's like a superhero for pilots, seeing things we can't.
Exactly. It's not just for rain, it's vital for detecting those wind shears, too. And that gives pilots a heads up to adjust their approach.
So who's responsible for gathering and sharing all this critical data?
It's a global team effort. We've got the National Weather Service, the FAA, the Department of Defense, even international organizations all working together.
Wow, that's impressive. So how do they manage to collect weather data, not just at ground level, but way up in the higher altitudes where planes fly?
It's a pretty amazing mix of methods, from surface observations at airports to some pretty sophisticated tools like weather balloons and satellites.
Let's talk about those surface observations for a minute. I've always been curious about those METAR reports, those cryptic codes you sometimes hear on the news. What exactly are they?
A METAR report is essentially a snapshot of the current weather conditions at a specific airport.
Oh, okay.
So imagine you see this KGGG 161753Z AUDO 14021G 26KT 34SM plus TSRA BR BKN 08 OVC 012CB 82970 RMK Priest SR. Looks like a jumble of letters and numbers, right?
Yeah, that's a lot to take in.
Right, but for a pilot, it paints a very vivid picture.
Okay, so decode it for us. What's it actually saying?
Okay, so KGGG, that's the code for Gray County Airport in Texas.
Right.
The string of numbers following tells us the date and time. So in this case, it's the 16th of the month at 17.53 Zulu time.
Zulu time.
Yeah, that's coordinated universal time.
So they have a universal time for aviation to avoid any confusion.
Right.
Okay, makes sense. What's next?
All you do. That means this report came from an automated weather station. And then 14 years, 21 26 KT. That tells us the wind is blowing from 140 degrees at 21 knots, gusting to 26.
So even something as seemingly simple as wind direction, that can have a big impact on a flight.
Oh, absolutely. A runway that's perfectly fine with a wind from one direction might be challenging if there's a wind shift.
Right.
And then we have 34 SM. That means visibility is 3/4 of a statute mile. And then things get a little interesting with plus TSRA BR. That means there are heavy thunderstorms with rain and mist.
Wow. That's a lot of weather packed into a short code. What about the clouds? I always hear pilots talking about cloud cover. Is that in there too?
Oh, absolutely. It's right there. BKN 008 OVC 082CB means broken clouds at 800 feet and overcast skies at 1,200 feet. But then there are towering cumulonimbus clouds.
Uh-oh.
Those are the ones that can bring heavy rain, even hail.
They even have symbols for those ominous clouds. It's almost poetic in a way.
It is. It really is. And then we have the temperature and dew point.
Hey.
1817. It means it's 18 degrees Celsius with a dew point of 17 degrees Celsius. And A2970 is the altimeter setting. That's crucial for pilots to know how high they are above sea level.
And finally, RMK Press FR. What's that all about?
That means the barometric pressure is falling rapidly, often a signal that a change in weather is on its way.
So pilots can glance at this METAR code and get a sense of the conditions on the ground. It really is like their own secret weather language.
It is. And you wouldn't believe it, but a single letter in a METAR, like a V for variable wind direction, can make the difference between a smooth landing and a bumpy one.
That's amazing. What about conditions higher up in the atmosphere? How do they gather information about the weather miles above the ground? It's not like they could just send someone up with a thermometer, right?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. They use these incredible things called radiosondes. Imagine a tiny weather station attached to a giant balloon.
Wait, so they send weather balloons up into the atmosphere?
They do. They release these radiosondes twice a day from hundreds of locations all around the world.
I never knew that. I'm picturing like a colorful dot slowly rising into the sky. How high do these things go?
They can reach incredible heights, sometimes exceeding 115,000 feet. That's higher than most commercial airliners fly.
Wow. So they're literally venturing into the stratosphere?
They are.
What happens to the balloon once it reaches that height?
Well, the balloon expands as it goes higher because of the decreasing air pressure. Eventually, it bursts, sending the radiosonde back to Earth.
Oh, no.
Don't worry, it comes down gently thanks to a parachute.
So there are potentially little weather stations parachuting down all over the place. Are they recovered?
Only about 20% are found and returned, but if you ever find a strange contraption hanging from a parachute in your backyard, you might have stumbled upon a weather treasure.
I'll keep an eye out. That's incredible. So we have weather data from the ground and from these incredible balloons.
Yeah.
Are there any other ways to observe conditions aloft?
Well, pilots themselves play a crucial role. They report things like turbulence, icing conditions, cloud heights. We call those PIREPs.
PIREPs.
Yeah, pilot reports.
Ah, so the pilots are like sky-high weather reporters?
Exactly. And, with technology advancing, many commercial aircraft are now equipped to automatically transmit weather observations
Really?
using systems like AMDR and MDCRS.
So it's like having a network of weather reporters constantly flying all around the globe.
That's a great way to put it.
It's amazing how they gather weather information from the ground, from balloons, and even from the planes themselves. I bet they have some pretty sophisticated ways to get all this information to the pilots then, right?
Oh, absolutely. That's where aviation weather service outlets come into play.
Outlets.
Yeah. Think of them as information hubs for aviation weather,
Okay.
providing pilots with briefings and advisories before and during their flights.
So it's like having access to like a personal weather expert.
Exactly.
Okay, lead the way.
Yeah.
What are some of the key outlets pilots rely on?
Well, one of the primary sources is the Flight Service Station, or FSS.
FSS.
Pilots can connect with them 24/7 by phone or online to get detailed briefings on weather conditions along their planned route and at their destination.
So it's like calling up your own personal weather guru before heading out.
Exactly.
That must be so reassuring for pilots. What about during the flight itself? Can pilots get updated weather information while they're in the air?
Oh, there are definitely systems in place for that. You've got HIWAS,
Highways.
the Hazardous In-Flight Weather Advisory Service.
Okay.
It's a continuous broadcast of hazardous weather information over specific navigation frequencies.
So pilots can just tune in and get those real-time alerts about things like sudden thunderstorms or icing conditions.
You've got it. It's like having a weather radio built right into the cockpit.
That's awesome.
And then up in Alaska, they have TWE,
TWE.
the transcribed weather broadcast, providing similar information.
Wow. It's incredible how much effort goes into making sure pilots have access to accurate and up-to-date weather information.
Well, safety is absolutely paramount in aviation, and weather plays such a critical role in that.
Absolutely. Speaking of safety, let's dive into those weather briefings that you mentioned earlier. You talked about pre-flight briefings, but are there other types that pilots might request?
There are actually three main types. You have standard, abbreviated, and outlook briefings, each with a specific purpose and a different level of detail.
Okay, let's break those down.
Yeah.
What's included in a standard briefing?
It's the most comprehensive type, giving pilots a thorough overview of all the weather they might encounter.
Okay.
So adverse conditions, reasons why visual flight might not be recommended, a synopsis of larger weather patterns, current conditions, en route forecasts, destination forecasts, and even potential air traffic control delays.
Wow. That sounds like a lot of information. It must be essential for planning any flight.
It really is. It's considered the gold standard for pre-flight preparation.
What about an abbreviated briefing? When would a pilot request that?
Think of it like a quick update.
Okay.
Pilots use it when they need to just refresh a previous briefing or if their departure has been delayed.
Got it.
It focuses on just the key changes or updates since the last briefing.
So like a quick weather checkup.
Exactly.
Okay. And what about outlook briefings?
Those are specifically for flights that are scheduled to depart 6 or more hours in the future.
Oh, wow.
It's a preliminary look at the potential weather, so pilots can make some early decisions about their route, altitude, or even whether the flight is a go or no-go.
Right. But even with an Outlook briefing, they'd still need a standard briefing closer to departure, right?
Absolutely. The weather can change so quickly, so having the most up-to-date information is crucial.
Okay, we've got these briefings covering current and expected conditions. Let's talk about aviation forecasts. What are the key forecast products pilots use to kind of stay ahead of the weather?
Well, there are several types designed specifically for aviation. You've got your terminal aerodrome forecasts or TAFs, area forecasts or FAs, in-flight weather advisories like SIGMETs and AirMets, and winds and temperatures aloft forecasts.
Wow, that's a mouthful. A
Yeah.
lot of acronyms there. Let's start with TFs. What exactly are those?
A TF is like a hyperlocal weather forecast for a specific airport. It covers a 5-mile radius around the airport.
Okay.
It provides a detailed outlook on expected conditions at that particular location. Things like winds, visibility, anticipated weather phenomena, cloud cover, and any potential changes in those elements over a 24 to 30-hour period.
So if you're planning to fly in or out of a particular airport, a TF is essential reading.
Oh, absolutely, especially for busy airports where even small changes in weather can have a big impact on operations.
Okay, what about area forecasts? How are those different from TFs?
Area forecasts, or FAs, are like taking a wider lens and looking at the weather over a larger region,
Okay.
typically covering several states. They focus on factors that could affect visual flight rules or VFR operations, giving pilots that broader perspective on weather patterns they might encounter.
So they're like the big picture view of the weather in a particular region.
Exactly, and they're particularly helpful for pilots planning longer flights that cover a lot of ground.
You also mentioned in-flight weather advisories.
Right.
What are SIGMETs and AirMets, and how do they help keep flights safe?
Think of these advisories as urgent weather bulletins for pilots.
Okay.
They're issued when specific weather conditions are forecast that could pose a safety risk.
So like a danger zone sign flashing in the sky.
Exactly. SIGMETs are issued for non-convective weather hazards, so things like severe icing, severe turbulence, dust storms, and even volcanic ash.
Those sound pretty serious. And AirMets.
Airmets are for conditions that are potentially hazardous to smaller aircraft, so things like moderate icing, moderate turbulence, strong surface winds, low ceilings, and extensive mountain obscuration.
So pilots need to be on the lookout for these advisories and adjust their flight plans accordingly.
Absolutely.
What kind of adjustments might they make?
Well, it depends. Sometimes a slight change in altitude or route is enough to avoid the hazard. Other times, a pilot might decide to delay the flight or even cancel it altogether if conditions are just too risky.
Right. It's all about making informed decisions and keeping everyone safe.
Exactly.
Okay, what about the winds and temperatures aloft forecasts, those FBs? What information do those provide?
Well, imagine you're sailing a boat across a river with a strong current. Knowing the wind speed and direction at different altitudes is like understanding that current.
Okay,
It helps pilots essentially sail their aircraft efficiently.
I like that analogy.
So FBs provide forecasts of wind speed, wind direction, and temperature at various altitudes.
So it helps them optimize their flight path for both efficiency and safety.
Exactly. Just like a sailor uses knowledge of currents, pilots use FBs to calculate more accurate flight times and make sure they have enough fuel,
Right.
all while staying clear of any potential rough air.
It's fascinating how they use that weather information to make those calculations.
Yeah, it's really a crucial part of flight planning.
Okay, we've covered a lot of reports and forecasts, but there's another important aspect of aviation weather, right?
Right.
Weather charts. What can you tell us about those?
Weather charts are like visual roadmaps for pilots,
Okay,
helping them understand and navigate weather patterns.
got it.
They're graphical representations of weather data, and there are different types that offer unique perspectives.
So it's like looking at a map of the atmosphere. What are the main types of charts that pilots use?
Some of the most common ones are surface analysis charts, weather depiction charts, and significant weather prognostic charts.
Okay, break it down for us. What does a surface analysis chart show?
Think of it like a snapshot of what's happening on the ground weather-wise. So areas of high and low pressure, fronts, temperatures, dew points, wind speeds and directions, and even local weather phenomena like thunderstorms or fog.
So it's like a comprehensive overview of current conditions.
Precisely. They actually use these detailed symbols called station models to represent data from individual weather reporting stations.
Oh, wow.
Each symbol is like a mini weather report.
Okay, what about weather depiction charts? What makes them unique?
These charts are like a traffic light system for pilots.
Okay.
They use a color-coded system to depict areas of IFR, MVFR, and VFR weather.
Got it.
So it's very easy to identify those challenging regions.
I see. So green means good to go, yellow means proceed with caution, and red means no-go zone.
That's a great way to think about it.
That's a great visual. Okay, so what about significant weather prognostic charts?
Those are all about forecasting those aviation weather hazards. They give pilots a heads up about potential challenges,
Okay.
like turbulence, icing conditions, and low visibility.
So it's like a sneak peek into the
Yeah.
future of the weather.
Exactly. And they actually come in two flavors. Low-level charts for altitudes up to 24,000 feet, and high-level charts for those flying between 25,000 and 63,000 feet.
It's incredible how much information pilots have access to.
It's all about mitigating risks and ensuring the safest possible flight. And, as technology advances, we're seeing even more sophisticated tools to help pilots stay ahead of the weather.
That's a perfect segue to our next topic, electronic flight displays, or EFDs. I've always been curious about those. How do they factor into aviation weather services?
They've revolutionized the way pilots access and interact with weather information.
Okay.
It puts a wealth of data at their fingertips.
It's like having a mini weather center right there in the cockpit.
Exactly.
Wow.
They can display everything from graphical NEXRAD radar data to METAR reports, TAFs, wind data, lightning strikes, even SIGMETs and AirMets.
That's incredible. So pilots can actually see all of this information overlaid on their navigation displays.
They can.
What does that mean for their decision making?
Well, it gives them a real-time visual representation of weather conditions around them. So it significantly enhances their situational awareness. It lets them make those informed decisions on the fly.
Let's delve a little deeper into that NEXRAD radar data. It seems to be a key feature on EFDs.
Oh, it is. It's one of the most valuable tools a pilot has.
Okay.
NEXRAD provides a highly detailed picture of precipitation patterns, helping pilots avoid thunderstorms, heavy rain, and other hazardous weather.
But it's not exactly real time, is it?
You're right. That's an important point. There's a delay between when the data is collected and when it's displayed. The age of the data is usually shown on the screen.
Okay.
But pilots need to be aware that it might be 15 or 20 minutes old.
So the weather they're seeing on their display might have moved or even intensified since then.
Exactly. That's why it's so crucial to use NEXRAD data along with other information,
Okay.
like MEPAR reports and those pilot reports, to get a more accurate picture.
Are there any other limitations of NEXRAD that pilots need to be aware of?
Yeah, there are a few things. First, NEXRAD can sometimes pick up what we call ground clutter. So it can be tricky to distinguish between real weather echoes and false signals.
Got it.
Second, it can't always detect the type of precipitation, so it might show an area of precipitation, but not whether it's rain, snow, or hail.
Ah, right.
And lastly, NEXRAD has limited resolution, meaning it can't always show the finer details of weather features.
So it's essential for pilots to use NEXRAD alongside other weather data and their own judgment.
Absolutely. It's a powerful tool, but not a replacement for experience and sound decision-making.
So it sounds like EFDs have really changed the game when it comes to aviation weather.
Huh.
But even with all these fancy displays, don't pilots still rely on good old-fashioned communication with air traffic control for those real-time weather updates?
Oh, absolutely. Technology is fantastic, but sometimes the best source of information is another human being who's actually, watching the skies.
Right.
Air traffic controllers play a vital role in keeping pilots informed about weather hazards.
So they're like the eyes in the sky, kind of helping guide those pilots around those stormy patches.
Exactly. Controllers have access to radar systems that can detect precipitation, so they can see where those storms are brewing
Got it.
and advise pilots accordingly. They might suggest a slight deviation from the planned course or even a completely different route to steer clear of the rough stuff.
What if their systems can't tell what kind of precipitation it is? Is it still helpful?
Absolutely. Even if they can't determine if it's rain, snow, or hail, they can still pinpoint the location and the intensity of the precipitation.
Okay.
They'll use terms like light, moderate, heavy, or extreme to give pilots a sense of what to expect.
Right.
Any information that helps avoid potentially hazardous weather is valuable.
I can see how that would be reassuring for a pilot.
Yeah.
Knowing that someone's got their back, watching out for those weather surprises.
It's definitely a team effort up there.
Yeah.
Controllers and pilots working together to keep everyone safe.
But a controller's primary job is to maintain that safe separation between aircraft.
Right.
Helping pilots avoid weather is kind of secondary.
Exactly.
So pilots can't expect controllers to be their, like, personal weather navigators.
That's right. Pilots are ultimately responsible for making their own weather-related decisions.
That's
They
right.
need to use all the tools and information available to them.
What about turbulence? Can ATC radar detect that?
Unfortunately, turbulence is invisible to radar,
Uh-huh.
but skilled controllers can often anticipate where it might be lurking based on other factors,
Okay.
like the intensity of precipitation or the presence of those powerful convective storms we talked about earlier.
So if a controller sees a particularly nasty-looking storm on their radar, they might warn pilots about potential turbulence in that area, even if the pilot hasn't encountered any yet.
Precisely. And pilots should always heed those warnings.
Right.
It's always better to err on the side of caution when it comes to weather.
What options does a pilot have if ATC issues a weather advisory?
Well, they can simply acknowledge the advisory, meaning they've heard and understood the information,
Okay.
or they can acknowledge it and request an alternative course of action.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Sure. They might request what's called a deviation,
Okay.
asking to fly a certain number of miles off their current course to skirt around the weather, or they could request a new route altogether.
So instead of a detour, it's a whole new road trip in the sky.
Exactly. Sometimes a change in altitude is all it takes, climbing or descending to find smoother air or avoid those pesky icing conditions.
And if all else fails, can't they just ask the controller to help them navigate around the weather using radar vectors?
You got it.
Hmm.
Radar vectors are essentially instructions from the controller guiding the pilot around the weather using radar.
Yeah.
It's a true partnership, working together to navigate those sometimes treacherous skies.
You mentioned earlier that technology is constantly evolving in aviation. Let's talk about data link weather for a minute. It sounds like a real game changer. What exactly is it, and how is it changing the way pilots stay informed about the weather?
It's revolutionary. It allows pilots to receive continuous, up-to-date weather information right there in the cockpit,
Yeah.
even when they're beyond the reach of those radio transmissions.
So no more crackling radios and trying to decipher those sometimes cryptic reports.
Exactly. Data link weather is like having a clear, concise weather news feed streamed directly to the cockpit. It dramatically improves situational awareness.
I can only imagine how reassuring that must be for pilots. So how does it actually work?
There are two main systems, FISB,
FISB?
which stands for Flight Information Service Broadcast, and then there are commercial data link services.
Oh.
FISB is a ground-based system that transmits weather and aeronautical information over a network called ADSB, Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast. It's essentially a network of ground stations that are broadcasting this weather data to aircraft that are equipped with ADSB receivers.
So it's like a weather radio network, but specifically for aircraft.
That's a great way to think about it.
What kind of information does it provide?
All sorts. We're talking METARs, TAFs, next-rod radar imagery, NOTAMs.
So TAMs.
Those are notices to airmen about potential hazards, airmets, SIGMETs, convective SIGMETs, and even information on temporary flight restrictions.
Wow. That's like a one-stop shop for all things weather.
It really is, and it's free.
Free.
Provided by the FAA as a public service.
That's fantastic. You also mentioned those commercial data link services.
Yeah.
What do those offer that FISB doesn't?
They typically provide a more comprehensive package, often including things like real-time lightning data, turbulence forecasts, and icing forecasts.
So it's like having a premium weather service subscription, but for your cockpit.
Exactly. But unlike FISB, these services come with a fee.
Right.
Pilots can choose the option that best suits their needs and budget.
So there's a range of options for staying weather savvy up in the skies. But with all this information so readily available, is there a risk of information overload?
Oh, yeah.
I can imagine it might be overwhelming for pilots.
It's a valid concern. We actually call it information overload.
Okay.
And it's definitely something pilots need to be mindful of. It's not just about having access to the information, but about managing it effectively.
So how can they avoid getting bogged down in all that data and maintain focus on actually, flying the airplane?
It's all about prioritizing and filtering. Pilots need to be selective about what information they display and how they display it. Focus on the most critical data, learn to tune out the noise.
So it's not just about having the technology, it's about knowing how to use it wisely.
Exactly. Data link weather is a powerful tool, but it's only as good as the pilot's ability to interpret and apply that information.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Are there any other kind of key things pilots should keep in mind when they're using data link weather?
Yeah, absolutely. It's important to remember that even though data link weather is digital, there's still a delay between when the data is collected and when it's displayed,
Okay.
what we call product latency.
Right, right.
So pilots need to factor that delay into their decision making.
So they can't just assume that what they're seeing on their display is a perfectly accurate representation of what's happening at that very moment.
That's right. The weather might have moved or changed in intensity since the data was collected.
So it's not a substitute for, looking out the window and using their own judgment.
Exactly. They also need to be aware of product update cycles, meaning how often the data is refreshed.
Right.
Some products update every few minutes, while others might only update hourly.
So knowing how current the data is, that's really crucial.
It is.
What about system failures? Can those happen with data link weather?
Of course. Just like any piece of equipment, data link systems can malfunction. Pilots need to be able to recognize when that happens and know how to respond.
That sounds crucial.
It is.
What else should they be aware of?
Well, coverage is another important consideration. Data link weather isn't available everywhere. There can be gaps, especially in more remote areas.
So pilots can't always rely on it, especially in those less traveled parts of the world.
Exactly. And the coverage area can vary depending on whether they're using a ground-based system like FISB or a satellite-based system.
Right.
Ground-based systems are limited by the range of those ground stations.
So pilots need to know the limitations of the system that they're relying on.
Absolutely. And they also need to be familiar with the specific symbols and formats used on their data link displays.
Right.
Different systems might use slightly different ways of presenting the information.
It's almost like learning a new language.
It is.
The language of data link weather. What about the reliability of the data itself?
That's where data integrity comes in. Data link weather is generally very reliable, but it's not perfect. There can be errors, and pilots need to be able to recognize them.
Okay.
It's all about being a critical consumer of information.
So it's not just about blindly trusting the technology. It's about using their own judgment, their own experience to assess the data.
Exactly. Even in this age of sophisticated systems, those human skills and experience are still paramount. It's really a partnership between the human and the machine.
Wow, it's amazing how pilots have to juggle all this, this complex world of weather information, relying on both that cutting-edge technology and good old-fashioned human judgment.
It really is a constant balancing act, and it's part of what makes aviation so compelling, don't you think?
Absolutely. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from those cryptic METAR reports to those sophisticated data link systems beaming those updates straight into the cockpit. It's been quite a journey.
It has, and it all highlights that incredible effort that goes into making sure we all fly safe.
It does.
It's a complex system, a lot of moving parts, but it's all working together to keep those planes flying safely.
For those of us who aren't pilots, what's the key takeaway here? Why should we even care about all these reports and forecasts and technologies?
Well, I think understanding aviation weather services gives you a glimpse behind the curtain of air travel. It's easy to take for granted that planes take off and land safely every day.
It is.
But it's a real testament to the dedication of so many people who work tirelessly to monitor weather patterns, gather and share crucial data, and really equip pilots with the tools they need to make those informed decisions.
It's like a well-choreographed dance, with everyone playing their part to ensure a safe and smooth performance.
That's a great way to put it. And it's a dance that's constantly evolving as weather patterns shift and technology advances. Staying ahead of the curve is essential, both for the pilots and for the aviation industry as a whole. It's a never-ending pursuit of knowledge and improvement.
So even if we're not planning on becoming pilots anytime soon, just learning about this world gives us a newfound appreciation for the complexity and challenges of flight.
Absolutely. It really highlights the interconnectedness of everything. Weather affects us all, whether we're flying high above the clouds or simply going about our day here on the ground.
That's true. It's a reminder that we're all part of this intricate system and that knowledge is power. The more we understand about weather and how it impacts aviation, the more informed we become, whether we're passengers or aviation enthusiasts or just, curious minds.
And sometimes, a delayed flight, it's not just an inconvenience.
Right.
It can actually be a sign that the system is working.
Oh, okay.
prioritizing safety above all else.
That's a great point. It is reassuring to know that so much effort goes into keeping those flights safe, even if it means a little bit of extra waiting for us on the ground.
We all benefit from that commitment to safety.
Well said. And with that, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the fascinating world of aviation weather services. I hope you found it as enlightening as I did.
It's been a pleasure.
Before we sign off, I'd like to leave you with one final thought. Imagine you're in the cockpit with all those tools and technologies that we talked about at your disposal. You've got your weather charts, your METAR reports, your data link weather updates. It's all right there, painting that vivid picture of the atmospheric conditions. How would you use all this information to make those crucial decisions and navigate safely through the skies?
It's a question that really invites us to appreciate the skill, the knowledge, and the judgment required to pilot an aircraft.
It certainly does. So the next time you see a plane soaring overhead, remember that there's a whole world of science and technology and human expertise working behind the scenes to make that flight possible. Thanks for joining us.
Until next time.